So let me introduce you to Tooba Durraze, who is founder CEO of Amoeba AI. They are doing something very new that will open your minds. And she's also one of our sponsors, and she's one of the big reasons why this summit is even happening. So give her a big hand, Tooba Durraze.
Thanks, Arjun. Okay, hopefully everyone's caffeinated. We're going to be talking through a lot of data-related stuff, which could be a dry subject, but it's not going to be. And one of the key framing things I'll say to start off is generally forget everything you heard in the past hour, because I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit contrarian to some of the things that we talked about. But before I jump into that, a bit of introduction into myself. So again, name's Tooba. I'm the founder and CEO of Amoeba. My background is in data science and AI. This is before AI was popular or famous. I'm dating myself, but 20 years. And then prior to starting Amoeba, I also worked in a lot of B2B SaaS type companies, startups, building products, selling products. So I've seen it all from all angles of go-to-market. I'm not a marketer. I like to say I'm a marketer's friend, and ideally in most cases, best friend, because I get you the data and the things that you need in order to get answers to move forward. And that's part of the reason why we started Amoeba as well. Okay, so my talks are generally controversial, but one of the things I want to start everyone off with is we've all been lied to in reference to our data. Now, what do I mean by that? Is show of hands, how many people have heard the expression data is the new oil? Great. So this is my analogy. Data is not the new oil. Data in actuality is like crude oil. If you put it in the car as is, your car is going to explode and not go anywhere, right? So at the inception, everything that we're talking about today in terms of whether you're running go-to-market, whether you're running marketing, your business, or whether you're building product, etc., everything stems from what is the data that you have and how can you best leverage it to do the thing that you need to get done. And then these are some of the things to keep in mind. As an example, we've all heard GenAI is the only way forward. I myself have been a victim to that lie. If you track everything, you'll know everything. We hyper-index on essentially putting a pixel on everything and anything to say the more data we collect, the better, in a better space we'll be. The answers are in a dashboard is also my favorite. We've heard that a ton. You look at static slides, or you look at essentially spreadsheets and dashboards and say, somehow I look and I'm supposed to know why something is happening, is like the assumption. So these are the kind of lies I'm speaking about in terms of how we use data. In general, the way we think about traditionally getting the most out of our data is in the form of things like reports and dashboards. But if you think about what happens when you're looking at a report or a dashboard, they're geared towards observation, right? Which is a very passive thing. So you're looking at what's happening at a map, but you're not entirely doing anything to move the map. And the antithesis of that is we want to move people towards how can you use your data to grow in whichever department, and then that growth lever is essentially the thing that requires reasoning. So let's talk about some challenges here. And none of these should be new, but I feel like they've been exacerbated these days because of everything that's come out. One, AI is shaking things up, whether you're using AI, whether your competitors are using AI, whether AI is happening around us, think of geo, all of that. But it's shaking things up faster than your teams can adapt. What I mean by that is you have playbooks that may have worked like a couple of years ago or even a couple of months ago, and none of those playbooks are relevant anymore because you don't know if tomorrow some great big initiative in terms of technology will shake in how your buyers are perceiving products, how your buyers are buying, and how your go-to-market motion is run. Second, your data is not reliable. We have a ton of tools at our disposal. We use a ton of systems. I think I was counting on my hand like all of the places the CEO of Iterable had worked, and I was like, okay, this in itself is like a bajillion tools. So everyone has a Salesforce, a HubSpot. Everyone is using different styles of ad platforms, and then you're lobbing on essentially an analytics solution on top. But the idea there is your data is still fragmented. It's sitting in 50 different systems. It's outdated because by the time you can actually reference it, the thing has already happened. And then it's disconnected because even if your team or your department's using a way to extract information out of that data, there are still other teams within your business who might not be looking at data the same way. So we're talking about go-to-market functions here, but again, finance data is a part of it, product data is a part of it. So if you think about each of those individual teams and how many products or analytics tools, et cetera, that they have, that they're using to extract anything out of it, you would be mind blown that on average, most of these teams are using 3 to 4 per department in terms of things to extract value out of their data. And that basically creates a worse problem for us. And then what happens as a result of that is you are stuck. You're in analysis paralysis. What I mean by that is you are constantly spending your time building these dashboards, building these reports, or getting prepped for your Monday morning meeting where you have to report things out and how things are working. But within that, you're not necessarily making any decisions or like moving the needle as fast as you could or in a more optimized way. I call this analysis paralysis. We all get stuck there. So we talk about AI as this like great overlord, overarching technology. And if AI is so great, the question I ask is, we're supposed to magically fix all our problems, right? We were supposed to implement these systems and we wake up tomorrow and then we're in the world where all of a sudden everything is fixed. And our go-to-market works so well that every quarter from here on out, we should have made our goals, all of us, right? Which is obviously not the reality. So why hasn't AI magically fixed all our problems? I'll talk through a couple of concepts here. The first is that we talk about the outputs that you get from existing tools, and you end up in a world where your data is not trustworthy. I'll give you an example of a customer whose CEO messaged the CMO and said, hey, we're doing really great at this initiative. I looked at this data. And then her response back right away was that, no, you're looking at the data wrong. We're doing great, but we're missing XYZ data points while you were calculating that. So automatically, that fragmentation has led to 2 different people within the organization coming to 2 very different conclusions around what's actually happening in the business. Secondly, it's telling you what's already happened or what's happening. It's telling you A plus B equals C, but it's never telling you why it's happening. And as much as we love calculators, they only get you half of the way there, right? Understanding why something is happening is the thing that you take forward in order to impact change in how you're going to do things, not just because it happened. And then because of that, our decisions, again, are stuck. So we're stuck in a world where you're talking to your channel managers, etc., and you're saying, hey, this advertising campaign was working great last week, and then we decided to throw more money at it. Why isn't it continuing to work? And then you're also taking that to your C-suite execs or your boardroom meetings and saying, I think this worked last quarter because of this, and I'm kind of going to base my assumption on what I see, and then make a forward-looking assumption of where I want to go in search of that. So this big question of like, how do I hedge my bet? And like where I need to be data-driven in order to hedge that bet is the question that should be front and center for all of us. And then what we're talking about here is, I've taken the magic out of AI, but I'm going to bring it back to magic for 1 second. What we're really talking about here is you need almost like a crystal ball, essentially. You need a system or a tool to be able to tell you, hey, this is happening. You need to be able to ask the question of why it's happening. And then you need for it to then keep that awareness within the system so you don't even have to ask the question. You want it to basically tell you what's going wrong in your business. Now, when we talk about AI these days, a lot of folks equate that to LLMs or Gen AI. And LLMs was probably one of the bigger advancements in the past couple of years. So why did they not solve this problem when it comes to data? And again, when I'm talking about data, I'm talking about both your structured data, which is your normal kind of quantitative data, and then your unstructured data as well, which is things like these talks, your advertising campaigns, like the actual campaign themselves, videos, gong calls, all of that. So like we're talking about the corpus, right? And the reason LLMs don't really work well for this use case, this is where I say I'll be contrarian, is because they automate language and not logic. Right? For anyone in the room, and we all tinker, probably with ChatGPT or some version, Claude, some sort of LLM. For all of us who've tinkered with some sort of an LLM, we also know how hard it is to actually extract value without really giving the system a ton of guidance. Right? And even if you give it to the system a ton of guidance, what might happen is 2-3 days from now, something shifts in the model and your outputs are different. Now, can that work well for when you're talking about like creative outputs? Sure, because there's a lot of variance that's allowed in creative outputs. But is that something you're willing to hedge your bet on in terms of the data points to run your business? Probably not. And again, it's predicting the next word, but not actually why something happened. So I like to say that your go-to-market stack already has an AI problem. because of these things. Like if your data is siloed, existing AI solutions will essentially just make up an answer. We all know garbage in, garbage out, but right now it's sometimes not even garbage out, because if you perceive output, sometimes they could look realistic, but again, they're a hallucination. So the underlying problem is that now that we have all this data and then we have these solutions on top that could provide value, there's a shared context that's missing in how the data communicates with these systems. So we say you essentially need a system that thinks in terms of your business goals. And when I say business goals, I'm talking on the macro level. That can be, your goal could be, I need to increase my revenue by X% quarter on quarter. Or you can think on a micro level and say, I need my pipeline to improve by X%. But either way, what you're looking for is a system that is not a chatbot, not a dashboard. Those things are apt for the way you would consume the information. But behind the scenes, what you need is a reasoning system, a system that's figuring out like why something is happening and then directing you accordingly. So there's one question that comes up a lot in my conversations with folks. We sell into enterprises and we're smaller, but we're very well versed in the world of AI. So a lot of questions that come up are, how is the world shaping or evolving past what exists right now in terms of predictive AI, causal AI? What is the right AI to use in what situation? And when I'm talking about go-to-market data here, I'm basically talking about business outcomes. So if you think of the past 10 years, we were relying a lot on historical data. So we were using a ton of like predictive models, right? We all talked about intent, etc. That's all based on what has happened in the past. Can we use that to predict what might happen in the future? Things like who's likely to click, churn, and convert. The next decade is going to be causal. So again, not just that something happened, but why did it happen? So not an entire reliance on your historicals as well, but basically trying to get to the root cause of like why something is happening, because obviously that just because two things coexist doesn't mean they're correlated, right? So you're really trying to get that out. So to refine that, predictive is based on pattern recognition. Causal is based on the understanding of why is the pattern happening. And then that's the leap from I'm an observer of what's happening in my go-to-market data, like I'm reading these things via dashboards, etc., versus I am sitting on top of a truly intelligent system that's going to drive business outcomes for me. And then the second thing that we get asked a lot, that we anchor to, is everything needs to be anchored to a goal. When you're asking the question, like basic questions like, what is dropping in my business? You need to have a combination of what is causing it, and you need to find remedies that would help you fix it. So when we talk about AI systems, we're talking about systems that are able to do both of those things for you instead of just doing one or the other, because you need both pieces. You need to understand the why, and you need to know what to do against it. So this bottom here where it says a flow of data, so we all start with, again, we talked about problems with data. We start with a good flow of data. We add on a reasoning layer on top of your data. The reasoning layer should cognitively understand what is happening in your data against your business. And then you move that towards an actionable recommendation. Now, I'll pause here. There are a lot of tools in the market who maybe fix flow of data, right? So you have a lot of tools that will say, okay, we'll normalize the data for you, etc. So there's a lot of money spent in that direction. And then on the opposite end, there's a lot of money spent on tools that allow you to automate something, because it's a problem that you face in the now. So all folks are using things like Clay, etc. I'm sitting in the room. I have to send 50 billion emails, and it's a problem that's front and center for me, so I'm just going to automate that. And then one thing I'd like to point out here is if that middle piece is missing, why you're automating something, and the thing you're automating being the right problem to solve, you will end up in a world of hurt down the line, essentially. So always think about that middle piece or the intelligence there as being the thing. So in our heads, every go-to-market question, whether it's, again, a micro question or a macro question, it's almost an experiment in its own, right? So you want to ask the questions, you want to analyze the answers, then you want, based on the analysis of the answers, you want to be able to simulate scenarios. What if I change this thing? Or what if I change that thing? What impact would that have on my business in a controlled environment? And then based on those simulations, this is where human intuition comes into play, you pick what to act on. And once you act on that thing, you observe what's happening, and then you let the system learn so it can direct you better next time. This is meant to be a loop, not a straight line, obviously. This is a really dense loop. but it's dense on the computation, right? On the math, on the systems. It's not dense on the end user, the human who is trying to run their go-to-market motion. So for the human who's learning it, your inception points are basically you're asking it, then you're putting forward a hypothesis on what you want to simulate, and then you're picking the thing to act on, and then you let the system govern that cycle. So I say that go-to-market systems and just go-to-market motions should not be a guessing game. I don't want to wake up tomorrow and know that, okay, all of a sudden something changed and I'm not going to meet my goals. I want there to be more predictability in how I'm getting to business outcomes. So it should be a scientific loop. And again, you need machines that are powerful enough to run that scientific loop every day on your behalf. So we're not talking about you sitting there and manually running these loops. You need systems that are able to do that at both micro and a macro scale. What is Amoeba and how do we solve for this? There are plenty of ways to solve for it, but we have a slightly different perspective on how we solve for it. Amoeba is essentially built to solve that problem, where your scientific loop essentially in a box. So we do everything. We take your data in its rawest format, so whether it's structured, unstructured, whether you're missing a ton of data, you don't have a ton of data, all of that. So think of all the problems that exist. And then we take that and we run it through our system, and we end up with some ways for you to act and observe based on the outputs from the system. But one of the differentiators about Amoeba is that system is always goal-aware and is always context-aware. So the system doesn't rely on you bringing forward a semantic understanding to the system. The system is smart enough to learn what is actually happening in your data, how you run your business, based on the inputs that it's connected to. So you end up in a space where you can build a forward-looking plan. So as of right now, everyone's probably planning for Q4 or their next fiscal year. But you're in a position where you can actually build a forward-looking plan by combining your data with not just your data, but also what's happening in the market, because a lot of that is shifting the way your business is being run. So it's insights that evolve and are as fast as the market's evolving. So you're never in a position where, again, you wake up tomorrow and say, what happened with my data? What happened with my business? I'm like not aware of that. This is like our architecture, how we do it differently. So again, ingesting from all your normal sources. We do all the data prep within the product itself. And then our interpretation layer is where we're differentiated. It's because we're not an LLM-based stack, we're a Neuro Symbolic-based stack. And the reason, I promised Arjun I wouldn't talk about neural nets, but I'm talking about neural nets, sorry. So for those of you who are bored in the room, I can always deep dive on neural nets, but the one key framing here is the system is designed in a way that it thinks the way you do about your business. When Neuro-Symbolic AI architectures get rid of the problem of having to define context, get rid of the problem of having to define this is the definition on this thing in my business, get rid of the problem of you having to think about retraining the system if enough things in your data change. And then for you as a consumer, you just have a smart brain at your disposal that you can essentially use. It's built for go-to-market leaders and analyst teams, so you can use it, obviously, if you are already a data scientist or data analyst as a way to augment, but primarily its goal is to be anchored to folks who are running their business and the things that you use to run your business. So if you're a CMO or a CRO, you can understand what's driving your pipeline, and basically in a way where you'll never be in a position where you meet your pipeline number, but you're not meeting your sales goal at the end of the day. If you're in analytics and the ever-regarded function of RevOps, you can automate repetitive requests. I've sat adjacent to a lot of RevOps roles, and I would say they do God's work because there are a lot of requests that come their way. The idea here is that something that's repetitive can directly go to the business users. They don't have to be involved. And then if you're product or marketing team, so for all the startups in the room who are actually building products, this is a really good way to figure out like which part of the product will drive adoption/business versus what parts of the product are not being used and its impact on business is unheard of. So I say this is my prediction, and take 5 years with a grain of salt. It probably will happen a lot faster. But I don't think in the next couple of years, go-to-market teams are going to be running things out of dashboards. Will we still have things like Salesforce? Yes, probably. I don't think we're getting rid of things like Salesforce, HubSpot, etc. But you're not running your entire business off of just dashboards and spreadsheets. You're running them based on hypotheses. You and your team sit together in a room and are like, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? These are organic conversations that happen in your executive team meetings anyways. What's working? What should we try to have more business? I think these will happen within the agentic layer on top of your go-to-market stack. I'll kitschily say we're talking about go-to-market superintelligence, and I can guarantee you we'll probably get to go-to-market superintelligence before we will get to generalized superintelligence. So my stake is in the next 2 to 3 years, you'll have these like fully functioning brains, essentially, that are running your business, where you as a stakeholder are involved in guiding the brain and telling the brain where to go or where to pay attention, but everything else is taken care of by the brain. It could be a knowledge companion for executives, obviously, because executives spend a ton of time pulling data together. It could be a way to make self-service analytics easy, and it could be a way to do simulated experimentation. And then if you look at these 3 things that I pointed out, those are the 3 active ways you're consuming data right now. You're either pulling things together so your executive team and you can have a cohesive look on what's happening in your business, or you are self-exploring based on what's working, what's not working, whether it's like your business units or your channels, etc. Or you are planning what tests to try in market in order to drive better results. So these are, again, 3 ways in which you would consume data, should all be taken care of by that brain that we're speaking of. And then much more, of course. So the last thing I'll leave you with is, when you think about AI, when you think about LLMs and Gen AI and all of this that's at your disposal, don't just look at it from the lens of, hey, where can I reduce my pain in the now by automating something really fast so I don't have to do that repetitive function over and over again. You want to bring on systems that create a sense of understanding around your business, unify your perception, your executive team's perception of what's happening in your business. And you want to do that in a way that can scale, meaning you're not the Sherpa of the data at all times. So the companies that can reason with their data, can truly understand why something is happening, are the only teams who will win, because then you're not in a space where you're just reporting on something worked, something didn't work, but you can actually take lessons and then apply them to your future. Thank you. Just a quick plug for our AI data marketing workshop that's coming up after. But in any case, one thing I'll leave you with is Amoeba is a tool. There are other tools that allow you to do that, but we're in a brilliant space right now where we can tinker, right? Everyone has this idea of you can play around with tools and understand really what's happening. Before you pick something, I think it's really important to understand, is it just a toy that you tinker with for a few minutes, but then longer term will require a lot of investment for you? Or is it something where you put a little bit of investment up front and then ends up being a game changer for how you run your business? That's the only thought I'll leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you for such a great presentation. I'll try to frame my question, but we'll give you a little bit of context. I'm super aligned with what you said. Every GTM question should become an experiment. The reality is, whether you're working in a Series A, Series B, Series C startup, you only get very limited time and budget to do the experiments.
Yeah.
And so my question primarily is, who does these experiments, or who owns these experiments, and how much time do you actually spend on these experiments?
So the idea is you should have an experimental mindset, but to your point of, experiments are hard to run, and then you're left in a world where, like a simple A/B test, you run it for 6 weeks and I don't have any stat sig, so what actually happened there, right? So the idea is, with a tool like Amoeba, you're putting forth a hypothesis to the system, and then you're letting the system simulate a bunch of different scenarios in the form of those experiments. So your starting point of whether you implement that experiment is much more grounded in data and the things that can work. In terms of who would run the experiment, I think it depends. We have customers where they're giant companies and they're actually heads of go-to-market sit in meetings and say, hey, we want to try this initiative. Now, for anyone who has worked around, like I'm one of those people, I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll have an idea in my head. I was like, I really need to try that. And my head of go-to-market is sitting in the front and she's like, we should be conscientious about trying this, a different channel, whatever it may be. So I think you get those sorts of random questions, right, that come up in exec meetings. I think this is a great tool to say, this is why we shouldn't, or this is why we should. And then within Amoeba itself, you can also give it parameters. So if it's a smaller scale experiment, you can say, I want to see results in 3 weeks, and you let the system tell you, it's not worth running this experiment because the results that you're looking for are out of the context of what you can get within this thing. So the idea is that you should think about your go-to-market engine with some capacity to experiment, but instead of taking the onus of running each experiment to see whether it'll be successful or not, you simulate them with Amoeba and see whether you even want to run them or what the expected result would be.
Hi, Tooba. This is Ankit from India. I'm building a consumer tech startup. And a large chunk of the fundraising that we do goes towards our GTM and marketing. So we're trying to build systems to be intelligent and our way to actually really crack the revenue frameworks. So whatever you said hit a lot of right notes. I just wanted to ask a couple of things. One is some of the tools that I've explored in the past, it's hard to put your trust in. Like the example that you shared that the executive talking to their CMO and saying you're looking at the data in the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you're looking at it in a manual kind of a setting, you can always go back and see that how are you really computing that data and then establish that trust, okay, this parameter was wrong or whatever, right? So in some of these systems, are these like black boxes? You just need to trust it because we'll have to keep investing our marketing dollars basis insights that a system like this would probably generate. So how do we build that trust is the first question that I had. And the second is you talked about this Neuro Symbolic AI on how it learns from industry trends and also helps you generate better insights. So I'm wondering if it is more specific to specific industries and it takes that much time to fine-tune the model maybe to understand what that industry is about and generate specific insights, or it's more like general purpose, like me coming from India in a different industry would be able to use this versus somebody doing an enterprise AI in US?
Yeah, great questions, by the way. On your first question on trust, I think that trust is a two-part problem. One is technology and one is psychology. So trust in technology, in the outputs, as an example, every output from Amoeba ships with an evidence pack. Where is the answer coming from? Why was it reasoned a certain way? And then you can always like pull the thread. So you need that. As a consumers of this tech, like you should be investing in technology where it's at least a glass box, right? And then, yeah, fine, early days, you may test it quite heavily. And then once that trust is built in the technology, then, you take it from there. Which is also the thing that makes me nervous, by the way, when people jump straight to automation. Because it's like, you have these agents that are automating things for you. Do you trust them to reliably perform that function every single time? Because they're non-deterministic in nature. So that kind of covers on the technology front, which is, if folks tell you, I can't really tell you what happened behind the scenes, it means that they haven't instituted the right things or the right instruments to be able to reveal that to you, and all vendors should think about revealing that. The second part is the psychology. So two people can say, imagine I'm a CMO, you're my CEO, A plus B equals C. The reason A plus B equals C may look different to you, may look different to me. But normally what happens is you get in a room and then there's a he said, she said debate of like, I think I know my business better, so it looks like this. In most cases, like I would say, like I would shy away from my CEO and I'd be like, yeah, I think you might be right, but I'll try to redirect the conversation, right? But I think that's where a tool like Amoeba is really interesting because you have a neutral party at your disposal. And so it's not a he said, she said, it's more so stemming out of this is what the system says. The other caveat I'll offer here is oftentimes when you think about data, our minds automatically jump to precision, right? So we're like, it's exactly that. Data science is less about precision, it's more like a compass. So our tool is designed in a way, and a lot of tools should think about this, designed in a way where we're telling you within a certain amount of probability, it could be these things. And then your intuition is applied on top, I would say. So I hope that answers your question. In terms of applicability across different industries and verticals and stuff, there's a generalized version of the neural net that's trained on just industry benchmarks in that way. But the liquid neural nets are especially interesting in terms of how they can adapt between verticals, etc. So we generally ask for one traverse, which is 24 hours for us, and then they start learning from your data outside of that. But if you were to take this technology and apply it to D2C, you'll get answers. It'll understand those nuances or infer them from what's within your data to try to better position like what the outputs should be.
Thank you. We are at time. Thank you very much. Tooba will be around here, and thank you. She's going to run a workshop with Julie in the room in the front after lunch. So if you have more questions, please go attend the workshop where they can deep dive into all the questions that they are solving for. If you have a team and you want the team to be 10x what they are, you've got to send them to events. The best event to send them is AI Marketing Summit.